The Cumberland Gap was a strategic location as it allowed access into eastern Kentucky, East Tennessee, and western Virginia through the Appalachian Mountains. Because of its vital importance for the supply lines and movement of troops, Major General Burnside set his sights to recapture the Gap. In the first battle for Cumberland Gap, there were no casualties. However, Brigadier General George W. Morgan spotted an opportunity in March of 1862 when Brigadier General Stevenson left the Gap open to help with the Battle of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Even though the Union won the battle, it would not take long for the Confederacy to once again take control of the Gap. This would lead to a second battle for the Cumberland Gap in September 7th through 9th, 1863. Come along with us as Ambrose E. Burnside and John W. Frazer will face off for which side would once again control the Cumberland Gap. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up that time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking on the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine, but it convinces YouTube that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. Major General Ambrose Burnside. Major General Ambrose Burnside would be the commander of the Department of the Army of the Ohio. In August of 1863, he would lead his troops out of Cincinnati, Ohio, and move towards Knoxville, Tennessee. Going along the direct path towards Knoxville would lead Burnside directly into the Cumberland Gap. Because of the delays that Burnside was already experiencing during his march towards Knoxville, he split his troops apart when reaching the Confederate fortifications at the Gap. Burnside would be the commander over the Department of the Ohio, which held 3 brigades. The Independent Brigade, 9th Corps, under the direction of Colonel John F. DeCourcy. This held the 8th Tennessee Cavalry, 9th Tennessee Cavalry, 11th Tennessee Cavalry, 86th Ohio Infantry, 129th Ohio Infantry, and the 22nd Ohio Battery. The 3rd Brigade, 4th Division, 23rd Corps, under the direction of Brigadier General James M. Shackelford. This held the 2nd Ohio Cavalry, 7th Ohio Cavalry, 9th Michigan Cavalry, 2nd Tennessee Mounted Infantry, 1st Tennessee Battery, and the 11th Michigan Battery. The 1st Brigade, 3rd Division, 23rd Corps, was directed by Colonel Samuel A. Gilbert. This held the 44th Ohio Infantry, 100th Ohio Infantry, and the 104th Ohio Infantry. Burnside ordered one detachment under the command of Colonel John F. DeCourcy to confront Brigadier General John W. Frazer's 2,500 men garrison, who was guarding the Cumberland Gap fortification. DeCourcy was chosen because he had taken Cumberland Gap under the command of Morgan in 1862. Burnside would take the rest of his men 40 miles south over the brutal terrain to bypass the garrison. Burnside would reach Knoxville rapidly, as most of the Confederate troops were withdrawn from the area to fight in the Battle of Chickamauga. Knoxville fell to the Federal forces on September 2, 1863. Brigadier General John W. Frazer. Brigadier General John W. Frazer and his troops had very little battle experience. However, they were occupying a well-fortified gap that also had natural defenses. To also supplement their defenses, many of the men dug trenches in the mountainside in case of attack. Frazer was under orders from General Simon B. Buckner to hold the Cumberland Gap at all costs. There was no contingency plans made for a possible retreat. The men were expected to defend the Gap to the last man. Frazer would have under his command the 5th Brigade, Army of Tennessee. This would contain the 55th Georgia Infantry Regiment under the direction of Major Daniel S. Printup, the 62nd North Carolina Infantry Regiment under the direction of Major Brian G. McDowell, the 64th North Carolina Infantry Regiment under the direction of Lieutenant Colonel William N. Garrett, The 64th Virginia Infantry Regiment under the direction of Colonel Campbell Slimp, and the 1st Tennessee Cavalry Regiment under the direction of Colonel James E. Carter. This would total around 2,500 men. The two sides meet. Colonel John F. DeCourcy began to threaten the fortification from the north. However, it was not enough to force the Confederates to give up their position. Determined to dislodge the men guarding the Cumberland Gap, after learning that the gap was not surrendered, Burnside ordered a second brigade under the command of Brigadier General James M. Shackelford. Shackelford led his men from the south, heading northward toward the Cumberland Gap. On September 7th, the Federal forces demanded Frazer's surrender after a battery of artillery was exchanged between the two sides. This did not happen, and the Confederate forces stayed in place. Later that day, the Federal forces captured Gap Springs, which held the Confederate water supply. On the night between the 7th and 8th, Shackelford's forces attacked and drove in Frazer's pickets. DeCourcy used tactics to make it seem that he had more men than he had. He would have the men to change the numbers on their hats to make it seem that there was 16 regiments under his command. On September 8th, Burnside and Colonel Samuel A. Gilbert and his brigade marched 60 miles in a day, headed toward the Cumberland Gap. DeCourcy had joined up with Shackelford. Because Shackelford was the superior officer, he ordered DeCourcy to cover the Harlan Road to prevent any escapes. Once the morning fog had lifted, the Confederate forces began artillery fire against the forces of DeCourcy, but stopped after a few shots. Frazer met with both DeCourcy and Shackelford separately, but refusing to surrender his men, Frazer was hoping to stall for time in doing this. After this second refusal for surrender, DeCourcy attacked Frazer's northern outer lines and was able to push back the pickets to what is now known as Fort Rains. Burnside shows up. On September 9th, Burnside and his troops had now reached the gap. Sometime around 10 a.m. that morning, Burnside sent a message to Frazer telling him to surrender or the Federal forces would take the gap by force of arms. Frazer factored in that his men had low morale after they had received the news about Vicksburg and Gettysburg and had very little combat experience. Frazer also received word that he would not be receiving any reinforcements. Rather than give the Federal forces a victory by battle, Frazer did a calculated move and unconditionally surrendered his men around 3 p.m. that evening. Between 100 and 300 men were able to escape the area through DeCourcy's lines after the surrender was declared. They used the Harlan Road and had made their way into Virginia. The rest of the men and equipment were given over to the Federal forces. The total was 14 pieces of artillery, around 2,300 men and arms, and the strategic location of Cumberland Gap itself. DeCourcy was actually arrested by Burnside on the charges that he had allowed the men to escape because he did not cover the road completely. Abraham Lincoln stepped in as evidence came to light that DeCourcy did not have enough men to cover the entire road and prevent some of the men from escaping. Frazer was reduced in the rank to colonel and branded as a coward. He spent time at Fort Warren Prison in Boston Harbor for the remainder of the war. The Cumberland Gap would remain under Union control for the remainder of the Civil War. Burnside's supply lines now stretched from Camp Nelson, Kentucky, through Knoxville, Tennessee. Thank you. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian Civil War battles. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notification button. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries in Appalachian history.